Little girl sobbed, begging, "Don't hurt us." What the Hell's Angel did next made everyone cry. The bitter wind whipped through the narrow streets of the small Midwestern town, sending swirls of snow dancing across the empty sidewalks. Jack, the wolf. Walker pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his broad shoulders as he made his way home from his mechanic shop. His heavy boots left deep impressions in the fresh snow, each step accompanied by a satisfying crunch that broke through the afternoon silence. At 6'3", with arms covered in faded tattoos and a thick beard streaked with gray, Jack cut an intimidating figure. The few townspeople who crossed his path quickened their steps, averting their eyes. He was used to it by now. The sideways glances, the worried looks, the mothers who pulled their children closer when he passed. That's just how it had been since he'd settled in this quiet town 5 years ago. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The mechanic shop had been quiet today, thanks to the snowstorm. Jack had spent most of his time alone in the garage, working on an old Harley that brought back memories he'd rather forget. His weathered hands, marked with engine grease and old scars, were still cold despite the thick work gloves he wore. Main Street was deserted, the usual bustle of the small town muted by the weather. Shop windows glowed warmly against the gathering gloom, but Jack kept his eyes forward, focused on getting home to his small house on the edge of town. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes catching in his beard and melting against his skin. He turned down Hamilton Alley, his usual shortcut. The narrow passage between buildings was darker than the main street, lined with dumpsters and delivery doors. Steam rose from vents in the building walls, creating ghost-like shapes in the cold air. His footsteps echoed off the brick walls, accompanied only by the distant hum of heating units. The familiar smell of garbage and old cooking grease from the diner's dumpsters filled the air. Jack had walked this route hundreds of times, but today something felt different. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, an old instinct from his past life warning him that something wasn't right. He slowed his pace, his boots now moving silently through the snow. Years of street experience had taught him to trust his gut, to stay alert when things felt off. The alley stretched ahead, shadows growing longer as the winter afternoon faded toward evening. A sudden gust of wind swept through the narrow space, carrying with it a sound that made Jack stop dead in his tracks. It was faint, barely audible above the wind, but unmistakable, the sound of someone crying. Jack stood still, listening intently. There it was again, a soft whimper coming from behind one of the large metal dumpsters ahead. His first instinct was to keep walking. Other people's problems weren't his concern. That's how he'd lived his life since leaving his old, one behind. But something about that sound, the raw desperation in it, made his feet move forward instead of away. As he approached the dumpster, the crying became clearer. It was the sound of a child. Rounding the corner of the dumpster, Jack froze at what he saw. There, huddled against the brick wall, was a small girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her thin jacket completely inadequate for the freezing temperature. In her arms, she clutched a baby wrapped in what looked like a thin blanket. Both children were shivering, their faces red from the cold. The girl looked up at Jack's approach, her eyes wide with fear, tears frozen on her cheeks. The baby in her arms squirmed weakly, making small, distressed sounds that barely carried in the bitter wind. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he looked at the two small figures huddled against the brick wall. The little girl's thin jacket was dusted with snow, and her brother's blanket seemed far too light for the frigid weather. Their vulnerability struck something deep inside him, a feeling he thought he'd buried years ago. He took a careful step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the children. The girl pressed herself further against the wall, her arms tightening around her brother. The baby made a soft, whimpering sound, and Jack could see his tiny fingers clutching at his sister's jacket. "Hey there," Jack said, keeping his voice low and gentle. It felt strange. He hadn't spoken softly to anyone in years. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Are you okay?" The girl shook her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. She was trembling, though whether from fear or cold, Jack couldn't tell. Probably both. Her blonde hair was tangled and dirty, and her cheeks were red from the biting wind. The baby she held couldn't have been more than a year old. Jack took another slow step forward, then stopped when she flinched. He remembered how people usually reacted to him, the fear in their eyes, the way they crossed the street to avoid him. But this was different. This was a child, alone and afraid, and something in his chest ached at the sight. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, running a hand through his beard nervously. "You must be freezing out here. Can I help?" The wind howled through the alley, carrying with it another blast of snow. The baby started to cry, a weak, pitiful sound that made Jack's stomach clench. The girl tried to shield her brother from the wind, turning slightly away from Jack. Carefully, moving as slowly as he could, Jack crouched down. Snow soaked through the knees of his jeans, but he ignored it. He wanted to appear smaller, less threatening. His hands, rough from years of working on engines, hung loose at his sides where she could see them. "My name's Jack," he said, trying to smile. It felt unfamiliar on his face. "That's your little brother?" The girl nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes still wide with fear. A tear rolled down her cheek, freezing before it could fall. The baby's cries grew louder, echoing off the brick walls of the alley. "You both look really cold," Jack continued, keeping his voice steady and calm. "I just want to help. Maybe we could—" Before he could finish, the girl suddenly gasped, pressing herself even harder against the wall. "Don't hurt us, please!" she cried out, her voice cracking with terror. "Please, please don't hurt us!" Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The fear in her voice was raw, desperate. He'd seen that kind of fear before, back in his old life, and it had never sat well with him, especially not from a child. He lowered himself further, almost sitting in the snow now, trying to make himself as unthreatening as possible. "I promise I won't hurt you," he said softly, holding his hands up to show they were empty. "Can you tell me where your parents are? Your mom or dad?" Sarah's lip quivered as she looked up at Jack, her arms trembling from the weight of holding her baby brother for so long. "Mommy, she left yesterday," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the whistling wind. "She said she'd come back, but—" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, freezing in silvery tracks. Jack felt something crack inside his chest. The girl's words brought back memories of his own daughter, of promises he hadn't kept. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the children in front of him. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his gruff voice gentler than it had been in years. Sarah sniffled, adjusting her grip on Ethan. "We stayed in the apartment until the food was gone. Then we had to leave." She glanced down at her brother, who had stopped crying but was making quiet, whimpering sounds. "Mommy said there were bad men who would hurt us if they found us. She said not to trust anyone." The baby's face was red from the cold, his tiny fingers clutching at his sister's jacket. Jack could see that Sarah's arms were shaking from exhaustion. She couldn't have been carrying her brother for more than a few hours, but for an 8-year-old, it must have felt like days. "We've been walking," Sarah continued, her voice getting smaller. "I thought maybe someone would help, but—" She looked around the empty alley. then back at Jack with uncertain eyes. Everyone looked scary. Jack nodded slowly, understanding. He knew what people saw when they looked at him. A huge man covered in tattoos, with a wild beard and rough hands. He probably looked exactly like the kind of bad man their mother had warned them about. The wind picked up again, sending another blast of icy air through the alley. Ethan started to cry again, this time louder, more desperate. Sarah tried to bounce him gently, but her arms were too tired to manage it properly. "Here," Jack said softly, moving forward with his arms outstretched. "Let me help you with him." Sarah clutched Ethan tighter for a moment, her eyes wide with fear. But then her arms trembled again, and Jack could see the moment her exhaustion won out over her terror. "I promise," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not a bad man. I'm going to help you." He kept his movements slow and deliberate as he reached for the baby. "I won't let anything happen to either of you." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, searching his face. Then, very slowly, she loosened her grip on her brother. Jack carefully lifted Ethan into his arms, cradling him against his chest. The baby's cries softened almost immediately in response to the warmth. Seeing her brother calm down seemed to ease some of Sarah's fears. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on Ethan. "Come here," Jack said gently, holding out his other arm. Sarah hesitated, but when another gust of wind hit her, she stepped forward. Jack lifted her up easily, holding both children close to his chest. Sarah was as light as a feather, and he could feel her shivering against him. The bell above the diner's door jingled as Jack pushed it open with his shoulder, still holding both children. Warm air rushed over them, carrying the smell of coffee and fresh-baked pie. The contrast with the bitter cold outside made Sarah gasp softly. The diner was nearly empty, with just a few regulars nursing cups of coffee at the counter. The evening light filtered through foggy windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their surfaces gleaming under the warm overhead lights. Linda looked up from behind the counter, her usual cheerful greeting dying on her lips as she took in the sight before her. Her eyes widened at the large, tattooed man cradling two children. She hurried around the counter, her sensible shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. "Oh, my word," she said, her voice soft with concern. She reached them just as Jack was trying to help Sarah into one of the corner booths. The little girl's legs were stiff from cold, and she wouldn't let go of her brother. "What happened here?" "Found them in the alley," Jack said gruffly, finally managing to get Sarah settled. "They've been out in the cold too long." Linda's face softened as she looked at Sarah, who was huddled in the corner of the booth, her arms still wrapped protectively around Ethan. The baby had stopped crying, but his cheeks were still red from the cold. "You poor things," Linda said, pulling a clean cloth napkin from her apron pocket. She gently dabbed at Sarah's wet cheeks. "How about some hot cocoa to warm you up, with extra marshmallows?" She smiled warmly, the corners of her eyes crinkling. Sarah looked up at Jack, as if asking permission. He nodded, and a tiny smile appeared on her face. "Yes, please," she whispered. "And this little one," Linda cooed, touching Ethan's tiny hand. "He looks like he could use a bottle of warm milk. I think we've got some in the back." She straightened up, adjusting her apron. "I'll bring over some blankets, too. My grandson always leaves his extras here when I watch him after school." Jack settled into the booth across from Sarah, watching as Linda hustled away. The overhead light caught the gray in her hair, making it shine silver. She'd been working at this diner for as long as he could remember, always ready with a kind word or an extra slice of pie for anyone who needed it. Sarah was still shivering slightly, despite the warmth of the diner. She held Ethan closer, her small fingers gripping his jacket. The baby had fallen quiet, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Jack watched them, noting how Sarah's protective instincts matched those of someone 3 times her age. The snow was falling harder outside now, creating white swirls that danced past the window. Jack stared out at it, his mind racing. He'd acted on instinct when he found them, but now the reality of the situation was setting in. 2 kids, alone, with no one to look after them. His eyes drifted back to Sarah, who was humming softly to her brother, her own exhaustion evident in the dark circles under her eyes. The familiar clink of ceramic on metal sounded as Linda prepared their drinks behind the counter. Jack turned to look out the window again, watching the snow pile up on the sidewalk. What was he supposed to do now? He'd never planned on being responsible for anyone else ever again, not after everything that had happened. But as he sat there in the warm diner, listening to Sarah's quiet humming and the gentle bustle of Linda's movements, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Linda refilled the coffee cups of the few remaining customers, while Sarah and Ethan dozed in their booth, wrapped in warm blankets she'd brought from the back. The little girl had finally relaxed enough to let her brother rest beside her, both of them exhausted from their ordeal. Jack stood up quietly, careful not to disturb them. He caught Linda's eye and nodded toward the counter. She understood immediately, setting down her coffee pot and meeting him there, just out of earshot of the sleeping children. "Those poor babies," Linda whispered, glancing over at the booth. "What are you planning to do, Jack?" Jack ran a hand through his beard, his weathered face creased with worry. "I can't just leave them. The girl, Sarah, she said something about bad men coming after them. Their mother's missing." Linda's expression darkened. "Missing? We should call the police, Jack. They need proper help, maybe social services." "No." Jack's voice came out sharper than he intended, making Linda jump slightly. He lowered his voice again. "Sorry. But you know what happens in the system. They'll split them up. Sarah won't let go of her brother. You've seen how protective she is." Linda wiped her hands on her apron, a nervous habit she'd developed over years of difficult conversations at the diner counter. "I know you mean well, but this is serious. They need proper care, maybe medical attention." "I can take care of them," Jack interrupted. His large hands gripped the counter's edge. "At least for tonight. My place isn't much, but it's warm. They need rest, not more strangers asking questions." Linda studied his face carefully. She'd known Jack for years, served him countless cups of coffee, watched him sit alone in his corner booth. She'd never seen him like this, his usual gruff demeanor softened by genuine concern. "Jack," she said gently, "I know you have a good heart under all that." She gestured vaguely at his tattooed arms and leather jacket. "But taking in 2 kids, that's a big responsibility." "Just for tonight," he insisted, "until we figure something out. Look at them, Linda. They're terrified. Whatever they're running from, they need somewhere safe." The diner had grown quieter as the last customers filtered out. The snow continued falling outside, thick flakes illuminated by the streetlights. Linda looked over at the sleeping children again, then back at Jack. "At least let me help," she said finally. "I've got some extra blankets in the back, and some food I can spare. My grandson's about Sarah's age. I might have some of his old clothes stored away, too." Relief flickered across Jack's face. "Thanks, Linda. I mean it." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a cardboard box filled with blankets, some canned food, and a few items of children's clothing. "There's milk and juice in there, too," she said, pushing the box across the counter. "And my phone number. You call me if you need anything, understand?" Jack nodded, taking the box. He looked over at Sarah and Ethan, still sleeping peacefully in the booth. "I have to do this, Linda. I can't explain it, but I have to help them." Linda reached across the counter and squeezed his arm. "I know. Just be careful, Jack. For all their sakes." She watched as he gently woke Sarah, speaking to her in soft tones she'd never heard him use before. The little girl blinked sleepily, clutching her brother close as Jack helped them up. Jack pushed open the door to his small house, carefully balancing Sarah in one arm while cradling Ethan in the other. The children had dozed off during the short walk from the diner, their faces peaceful despite the cold. As he stepped inside, the familiar smell of motor oil and leather greeted him. The living room was cluttered but clean. Motorcycle parts were arranged neatly on shelves, and tools hung in organized rows on pegboards along one wall. A worn leather couch sat against the opposite wall, its cushions still showing the impression where Jack usually sat alone each evening. He flicked on the lights with his elbow, casting a warm glow over the modest space. The sudden brightness made Sarah stir, her small hands tightening around his neck. "Where are we?" she mumbled, her eyes blinking open. "My house," Jack said softly, trying to keep his gruff voice gentle. "You're safe here." He set Sarah down carefully on her feet, still holding the sleeping Ethan. The little girl looked around, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Tools and chrome parts glinted from every corner, and a half-finished motorcycle stood in the adjacent workshop area, visible through an open doorway. "Do you fix bikes?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, moving toward the couch. "That's my job. I'm a mechanic." He grabbed a clean blanket from Linda's box and spread it over the couch with one hand. "Here, this can be your bed for tonight." Sarah watched him closely as he arranged the cushions, creating a makeshift nest. Her eyes darted between Jack and the door, as if mapping an escape route. The wariness in her expression made his heart ache. "I know it's not much," Jack said, carefully laying Ethan down on the couch. The baby shifted but didn't wake, his tiny fingers curled into fists. "But it's warm, and you'll be safe here." He moved to the small kitchen, which opened directly into the living room. The space was basic, a stove, refrigerator, and a few cabinets, but spotlessly clean. Jack began pulling out ingredients for a simple meal, keeping one eye on the children as he worked. Sarah remained standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked impossibly small amid the tools and machinery that filled his world. The contrast struck Jack deeply, his life of solitude and rough edges suddenly interrupted by these two vulnerable beings. "Are you hungry?" he asked, pulling out a can of soup. "Linda gave us some food." Sarah nodded hesitantly, taking a small step toward the couch where her brother lay. She perched on the edge, her posture tense and alert. As Jack heated the soup, the domestic sounds of cooking filled the usually quiet house. The pot bubbled gently on the stove, and the spoon clinked against the bowl as he stirred. These simple sounds seemed to help Sarah relax slightly, her shoulders dropping a fraction. The scene before him was surreal, his bachelor pad transformed by the presence of children. Tools that had been his only companions for years now shared space with Linda's donated blankets and children's clothes. The tough, independent life he'd built seemed to shift and soften around the edges as he watched Sarah tentatively stroke her brother's hair. Jack turned back to the stove, his rough hands gentle as he prepared the simple meal. The parallel wasn't lost on him. These children, like the broken machines he fixed, needed careful handling and patience. But unlike the motorcycles that filled his days, their needs went far deeper than mere mechanical repair. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft clink of spoons against bowls. Jack sat at the small table across from Sarah, who carefully spooned soup into her mouth while keeping one hand on Ethan's blanket. The baby lay sleeping peacefully in a makeshift bed of cushions next to her chair. "This is good," Sarah whispered, her eyes fixed on her bowl. "Mom never really cooked. For us." Jack's hand tightened around his spoon. "No?" Sarah shook her head, stirring the soup absently. "Most days we'd eat at gas stations, or sometimes—" She hesitated. "Sometimes we didn't eat at all." The gnawing feeling in Jack's chest grew stronger. He watched as Sarah took another careful spoonful, eating as if she wasn't sure when her next meal would come. "Mom would sleep a lot," Sarah continued, her voice small but steady. "Sometimes for whole days. I had to take care of Ethan." She glanced at her brother, reaching out to adjust his blanket. "I learned how to change his diapers and make his bottles. Mom showed me once, and I remembered." Jack's throat felt tight. An 8-year-old girl, changing diapers and mixing formula. His knuckles went white around his spoon. "Where did you live?" he asked gently. "Lots of places." Sarah's shoulders hunched slightly. "Sometimes in cars, sometimes with Mom's friends, but they weren't nice people." She swallowed hard. "They would yell and throw things. Mom would cry a lot." Jack nodded, trying to keep his face neutral despite the anger building inside him. "That must have been scary." "I tried to keep Ethan quiet," Sarah said, her voice dropping even lower. "If he cried too much, Mom's friends would get mad. Sometimes they'd hit the walls." She looked up at Jack, her eyes wide with remembered fear. "I'd sing to him real quiet so they wouldn't hear." Jack pushed his half-finished bowl away, his appetite gone. He watched as Sarah finished her soup, scraping the bowl clean with her spoon. When she was done, she carefully lifted Ethan and carried him to the couch, tucking the blankets around him with practiced movements. "You're a good sister," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah didn't respond, but her shoulders straightened slightly at the praise. She climbed onto the couch next to Ethan, curling her body protectively around him. Jack cleaned up the dishes quietly, his movements mechanical as his mind churned with Sarah's story. When he finished, he turned to check on the children. Sarah's eyes were already closing, her small hand resting on Ethan's chest. In the dim light, Jack's gaze drifted to the single photo frame on his wall. A younger version of himself smiled back, his arms around a little girl with pigtails. His daughter, before everything fell apart. Before the drinking, the fights, the divorce. Before he'd lost the right to be called Dad. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. Here he was, trying to help these children, when he couldn't even take care of his own. His eyes moved from the photo to the sleeping forms on his couch. Sarah's face was peaceful in sleep, all the worry and fear temporarily erased. Ethan's tiny chest rose and fell steadily under his sister's protective hand. Jack ran a hand through his beard, doubt gnawing at him. What did he know about taking care of children? He'd failed his own daughter, failed her mother, failed himself. These kids needed someone stable, someone who knew what they were doing. Not a broken-down ex-biker with more regrets than achievements. Morning light filtered through Jack's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the living room. Sarah and Ethan were still asleep on the couch, their small forms huddled together under Linda's borrowed blankets. Jack moved quietly, careful not to wake them as he examined the few belongings Sarah had carried with her. Her backpack was worn and dirty, with a faded princess pattern barely visible beneath the grime. Inside, he found a few pieces of children's clothing, some diapers for Ethan, and an empty baby bottle. At the bottom, tucked into a side pocket, was a crumpled envelope. Jack hesitated, his weathered hands hovering over the paper. It felt wrong to pry, but he needed answers. With gentle fingers, he smoothed out the letter, noting the official letterhead of a rehabilitation center. "Dear Jessica," the letter began. Jack's heart stopped as he read the name. His hands began to tremble slightly, but he forced himself to continue reading. "We're writing to follow up on your most recent departure from our facility. While we understand the challenges you're facing, we strongly encourage you to return and complete the program. Your children need their mother, and your continued struggle with heroin addiction puts them at serious risk." Jack's jaw clenched. The letter went on to detail previous failed attempts at rehabilitation, mentions of Child Protective Services involvement, and pleas for Jessica to seek help. The date at the top was from just 3 months ago. Looking back at Sarah's sleeping face, memories flooded Jack's mind. Jessica. He remembered her clearly now. She'd been barely more than a kid herself when he'd first met her, hanging around the edges of the motorcycle club, looking for belonging in all the wrong places. He'd tried to help her back then, seen something of his own daughter's vulnerability in her lost eyes. But he'd failed. Just like he'd failed his own family. Jessica had disappeared one day, and he'd let her go, too wrapped up in his own downward spiral to do more than add her name to his long list of regrets. Now here was Sarah, Jessica's daughter, sleeping on his couch. The universe had a cruel sense of irony. Jack sank into his worn armchair, the letter dangling from his fingers. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders. These weren't just any lost children he'd found in an alley. They were Jessica's kids. Kids he might have been able to protect years ago if he'd tried harder, done more, been better. Sarah stirred on the couch, mumbling something in her sleep. Jack watched as she automatically reached for Ethan, checking on him even in her dreams. Such a heavy burden for such small shoulders. He thought about his own daughter, about all the times he should have reached out, should have fought harder to stay in her life. The familiar ache of regret twisted in his chest, but this time it was joined by something else: determination. The letter crinkled in his grip as his resolve hardened. Maybe he couldn't change the past, couldn't undo his failures with Jessica or his own daughter. But these children needed help now. They needed protection, stability, love, all the things he'd failed to provide before. Jack carefully folded the letter and slipped it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. The weight of it felt like a promise. This time would be different. This time, he wouldn't fail. Sarah sat cross-legged on Jack's worn carpet, her small fingers tracing the patterns in the fabric. Ethan played nearby with an old stuffed bear Jack had found in a box of forgotten things. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the living room windows, making the dusty air sparkle. "Did you always fix motorcycles?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but curious. Her earlier fear had begun to fade, replaced by the natural inquisitiveness of an 8-year-old. Jack looked up from the simple dinner he was preparing in the kitchen. "No, not always," he said, stirring the pot of mac and cheese. "I used to work in construction, building houses." "Really?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Like real houses?" Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his beard. "Really big ones sometimes. I helped build the hospital downtown." "Were you always alone?" The question was innocent, but it hit Jack hard. He set down the wooden spoon and walked over to sit in his armchair near the children. "No," he said quietly. "I had a family once, a daughter about your age." He reached for his wallet and pulled out a creased photograph. In it, a younger version of himself, less beard, fewer lines around his eyes, held a little girl on his shoulders at a county fair. Sarah scooted closer to look. "She's pretty. Where is she now?" Jack's throat tightened. She lives with her mama in California. I haven't seen her in a long time. Do you miss her? Every single day. Sarah picked up Ethan, who had crawled over to investigate, and settled him in her lap. Our mama leaves sometimes too, but she always comes back, eventually. Jack watched as Sarah smoothed her brother's wispy hair. Such a motherly gesture from such a young girl. I used to take my daughter camping, he said, the memories flowing easier now. We'd go up to the lake, make s'mores, count the stars. What are s'mores? Sarah asked. You've never had s'mores? Jack's eyebrows shot up. When Sarah shook her head, he stood up. Well, we can fix that right now. We might not have a campfire, but I've got a microwave. For the next hour, Jack showed Sarah how to make microwave s'mores. They made a mess with melted marshmallows and chocolate, but the sound of Sarah's giggling made the cleanup worthwhile. Even Ethan got into the spirit, smearing chocolate across his face with delighted squeals. As evening settled in, Jack found himself telling more stories about teaching his daughter to ride a bike, about family, picnics in the park, about the simple joy of reading bedtime stories. Sarah listened intently, asking questions and sharing her own small memories of better times with her mother. When night fell, Jack gathered extra blankets and pillows to make the couch more comfortable. He tucked Ethan in first, then helped Sarah settle beside her brother. Thank you, Sarah whispered as he pulled the blanket up to her chin. For the s'mores and the stories. Jack's hand rested gently on her head for a moment. Thank you for listening to them. He watched as both children drifted off to sleep, their peaceful faces illuminated by the soft glow of a nightlight. The house felt different now, warmer somehow, despite the winter chill outside. The empty spaces that had echoed with loneliness for so long were filled with the soft sounds of children's breathing. Standing in the doorway of his living room, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense of being needed, of having a purpose beyond just surviving another day. It scared him how right it felt, how natural. The county social services building loomed ahead, a gray concrete structure that seemed to drain the color from the morning sky. Jack parked his old truck in the nearly empty lot, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding Ethan close to her chest. Are we in trouble? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack shook his head, trying to keep his voice steady. No, sweetheart. We just need to talk to some people who help kids like you and Ethan. That's all. The lobby smelled of cleaning supplies and old coffee. A tired-looking receptionist directed them to the third floor, where they found themselves in a cramped waiting room with worn chairs and faded posters about child safety on the walls. Ethan fussed in Sarah's arms, and Jack pulled out a small stuffed animal from his jacket pocket. The bear from his house that Ethan had taken a liking to. The baby's face lit up at the sight of it, his tiny hands reaching out. Mr. Walker? A woman in her 40s appeared in the doorway, holding a manila folder. I'm Miss Evans. Please, come into my office. The office was small but tidy, with a desk covered in stacks of papers and a window overlooking the parking lot. Miss Evans had kind eyes behind her glasses, but her expression was professionally neutral as she gestured for them to sit. So, she began, opening the folder. I understand you found these children yesterday? Jack nodded, his throat tight. In an alley. They were cold, scared. Their mother's missing. Miss Evans typed something into her computer. Sarah and Ethan Thompson, she read. Yes, we have a file. Their mother has a history of unstable behavior. She glanced at Sarah, who was focused on playing with her brother. I want to help them, Jack said, leaning forward. They can stay with me until their mother is found. I have room. I can provide... Mr. Walker, Miss Evans interrupted gently. I appreciate your concern, but there are procedures we must follow. These children need to be placed in licensed foster care while we locate their mother. But they're safe with me, Jack protested, his voice roughening. They're just starting to trust me. Miss Evans's expression softened. I can see you care about them, but you're not a licensed foster parent. There are background checks, home studies, training requirements. Jack's stomach twisted. He knew his past would come up. His time with the motorcycle gang, his failed marriage, the mistakes he'd made. But looking at Sarah and Ethan, he couldn't bear the thought of them being sent to strangers. Please, he said quietly. Isn't there anything we can do? The system exists to protect children, Miss Evans explained, her tone gentle but firm. We have qualified foster families who are prepared to take them in temporarily. It's the safest option until we can locate their mother. Sarah looked up then, her eyes darting between Jack and Miss Evans. She must have sensed something was wrong, because she clutched Ethan tighter, her lower lip trembling. Jack felt the weight of helplessness settle over him. All his strength, all his determination to protect these children, and he was being stopped by paperwork and procedures. The system that was meant to help kids like Sarah and Ethan now felt like an insurmountable wall. Miss Evans began explaining the next steps, but Jack could barely hear her over the sound of his own heart breaking. He watched as Sarah hugged her brother, completely unaware that their brief sanctuary was about to end. Jack sat in his truck outside the social services building, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The children had been taken into temporary custody, but he wasn't about to let this be the end. He pulled out his old flip phone and started scrolling through contacts he hadn't touched in years. Come on, he muttered, finding the number he was looking for. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Mickey's bar. Mickey, it's Jack Walker. Need some information about Sarah Thompson's mother. There was a long pause on the other end. Jack? Haven't heard from you in what, 5 years? Listen, I know she used to come around your place. Dark hair, usually wore that green jacket. Mickey sighed. Yeah, I remember her. Amy Thompson. Hadn't seen her in months, though. Last time she was here, she was in pretty rough shape. Jack scribbled the name on an old receipt, his first solid lead. He thanked Mickey and hung up, already planning his next move. The cold bit at his face as he walked the streets of the old neighborhood where he'd first met Amy. The buildings were more run down now, windows boarded up, graffiti marking the walls. A few people recognized him, the ex-biker who used to try helping folks get clean. Most turned away quickly. At the corner store, Mrs. Chen was sweeping the sidewalk. Her eyes widened when she saw Jack approaching. Mrs. Chen, he said softly, trying to appear less intimidating. Need to ask about Amy Thompson. The old woman's face creased with concern. Such a sad thing, she said, shaking her head. Used to come in with her little ones. Always promised she'd get clean, but... She trailed off, looking down the street. When was the last time you saw her? 2 weeks ago. Looked terrible. Was with some rough people, you know the type. Jack knew exactly the type. He'd been one of them once. He spent the next few hours visiting the places Amy might have frequented. The abandoned warehouse where addicts gathered, the rundown motel on 5th Street, the soup kitchen where Sister Margaret served meals. Each stop painted a clearer picture, and it wasn't pretty. By late afternoon, Jack found himself outside the police station. Officer Martinez, an old acquaintance who'd helped him turn his life around years ago, was just leaving his shift. Walker? What brings you here? Jack explained about Sarah and Ethan, about finding them in the alley. Martinez's expression grew serious. Yeah, we know Amy Thompson, he said. checking around to make sure no one was listening. She was picked up 3 days ago. Heavy stuff, Jack. Possession with intent to distribute. She's looking at serious time. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He leaned against the cold brick wall of the station, remembering Sarah's hopeful face when she talked about her mother coming back for them. How bad? He managed to ask. Martinez shook his head. Third offense. With her record, she's not getting out anytime soon. Those kids... He paused, putting a hand on Jack's shoulder. They're going to need someone looking out for them. Jack stood there in the growing darkness, the weight of this new information settling over him. Amy Thompson wasn't coming back for her children. She couldn't. The system would keep Sarah and Ethan in foster care, bouncing from home to home unless someone stepped up, unless he found a way to help them. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the parking lot. In his pocket, Jack's hand closed around the small stuffed bear Ethan had left in his truck. His chest tightened as he realized just how desperate their situation had become. Jack's house had changed in subtle ways over the past few days. Bright drawings decorated the refrigerator, held up by mismatched magnets. Stuffed animals and blankets made cozy nests on the worn couch. Baby bottles lined the kitchen counter, and a stack of children's books sat on the coffee table. Every morning, Jack woke up early to prepare breakfast. He'd learned that Sarah liked her toast cut into triangles, and Ethan would only drink from the blue sippy cup. The routine felt natural now, like something he'd been doing his whole life. Time for breakfast, kiddo, Jack called softly, watching Sarah shuffle into the kitchen in her oversized pajamas. Ones Linda had brought, over from the thrift store. Her hair was tangled from sleep, and she rubbed her eyes as she climbed onto the kitchen chair. Is Ethan still sleeping? He asked, placing a plate of triangle-cut toast in front of her. Sarah nodded, taking a bite. He was fussy last night. I sang to him like Mommy used to. Jack's heart squeezed at her words. He reached out and gently patted her head, something that had become natural between them. You're a good big sister, Sarah. From the other room, Ethan's morning babbles started up. Jack moved quickly, knowing the baby's cries could escalate if he wasn't tended to soon enough. As he lifted Ethan from the makeshift crib, the baby's face lit up with a toothless grin. There's my little man, Jack said softly, his gruff voice gentler than anyone would have thought possible. He changed Ethan's diaper with practiced ease, something that had terrified him just days ago. Back in the kitchen, Sarah had finished her breakfast and was carefully washing her plate in the sink, standing on the step stool Jack had found for her. She took such pride in helping with chores, in being useful. It broke his heart a little, knowing she'd had to grow up too fast. Hey, Jack said, settling Ethan into his high chair. How about we do something fun today? Sarah's eyes lit up, but there was still that hint of caution, that fear of disappointment that no child should know. Like what? Well, it's finally warming up outside. Maybe we could try the park? The smile that spread across Sarah's face made Jack's chest feel tight with emotion. She bounced on her toes, excitement radiating from her small frame. Really? Can we really go? Later that morning, Jack found himself sitting on a park bench, watching Sarah push Ethan in the baby swing. The little boy's giggles carried across the playground, mixing with the sounds of other children playing. Sarah's face was flushed with happiness as she carefully pushed her brother, making sure not to go too high. She kept looking back at Jack, as if making sure he was still there, and each time he gave her a reassuring nod. The spring sun warmed Jack's face as he watched them play. A light breeze rustled the emerging leaves on the trees, and somewhere nearby, birds were singing. For the first time in years, Jack felt the heavy weight of his past lifting. The darkness that had clouded his life for so long seemed to retreat in the face of Sarah's laughter and Ethan's happy squeals. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this kind of peace, this simple joy. As Sarah helped Ethan out of the swing and led him tottering toward the sandbox, Jack realized he was smiling. Really smiling, without even trying. Jack sat on the park bench, his weathered hands clasped together as he watched Sarah and Ethan play in the sandbox. The leather vest he'd worn for so many years hung in his closet now, its patches and memories gathering dust. But the weight of what it represented still clung to him like a shadow. The sun warmed his face, but his mind drifted to darker places. He remembered the rumble of motorcycles, the feeling of power that came with being feared. The Hells Angels had been his family once, or so he'd thought. The brotherhood had filled a void, given him purpose when he felt lost. "Look, Jack, I made a castle." Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. He managed a smile and a thumbs up, but his mind was already sinking back into the past. His own daughter, Emma, had been Sarah's age when everything fell apart. The long rides, the late nights at the clubhouse, the fights with her mother. It all spiraled out of control so fast. He could still see Emma's tear-streaked face the last time he'd seen her, clutching her mother's hand as they walked away. Jack ran his rough hands over his face, feeling the coarse beard beneath his fingers. He'd chosen the club over his family, convinced himself that the brotherhood meant more than anything else. What a fool he'd been. The tattoos on his arms were permanent reminders of his mistakes. Skulls and flames that had once seemed so important now just marked him as someone to fear. Sarah helped Ethan pat down another tower of sand, her movements gentle and patient with her little brother. The sight made Jack's chest ache. He'd missed these moments with Emma, the simple joy of watching his child play, of being there when she needed him. His ex-wife's words echoed in his memory. "You're not fit to be a father, Jack. You're dangerous." At the time, he'd responded with anger, but now he understood her fear. He'd been living a life of violence and chaos, dragging his family into that darkness with him. The club had turned on him in the end, like they always did. A disagreement over territory, a fight that went too far, and suddenly his brothers weren't brothers anymore. He'd walked away with nothing but scars and regrets. A child's scream jerked Jack to attention, but it was just a kid on the swings, laughing. His heart was racing, though, that protective instinct now sharper than ever. He watched as Sarah carefully brushed sand off Ethan's hands, speaking to him in soft, soothing tones. These kids needed him. Not the man he used to be, the enforcer, the outlaw, but the man he could be. The man who made triangle toast and changed diapers, who read bedtime stories and checked under the bed for monsters. Jack stood up, his decision crystallizing like ice in his veins. He'd failed Emma, failed as a father once before. But life had given him another chance, dropped these two innocent souls into his path. Maybe it was redemption, maybe it was punishment, but whatever it was, he wouldn't fail again. Walking over to the sandbox, he knelt down beside Sarah and Ethan. The leather jacket he wore now was plain, unmarked by patches or symbols. His hands, once used for fighting, now helped steady Ethan as the toddler stood on shaky legs. "Ready to head home, kids?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah nodded, already gathering their small toys. Home. The word felt different now, filled with new meaning. He would make it a real home for them, no matter what it took. The lawyer's office smelled of old books and coffee. Jack shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, feeling out of place in his work jeans and plain t-shirt. Across the polished desk, Mr. Peterson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and studied the papers before him. "Mr. Walker," the lawyer began, his voice gentle but firm, I need to be honest with you. Gaining custody of these children won't be easy. The courts typically favor biological parents or close relatives. Jack's hands tightened on the armrests. Their mother's in jail. She can't take care of them. Even so, Mr. Peterson continued, shuffling through the documents, you have no legal relationship to these children. Your own history. He paused, glancing at another paper. Your past involvement with the Hells Angels could be problematic. The morning sun filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the desk. Through the office window, Jack could see Sarah in the waiting room, showing Ethan a picture book. Linda, the waitress who'd agreed to help watch the kids, sat nearby. That was years ago, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm different now. Mr. Peterson leaned forward. The court will want proof of that. They'll look at your income, your living situation, your support system. They'll want character references, proof of steady employment, a clean criminal record for at least 5 years. Jack watched as Sarah pointed to something in the book, making Ethan giggle. The sound carried faintly through the glass. I have all that. My mechanic shop's doing well. I own my house. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. You'll need more than that, Mr. Peterson said. We're talking home studies, psychological evaluations, parenting classes. The process could take months, maybe longer, and there's no guarantee of success. A heaviness settled in Jack's chest. He remembered the social worker's words about foster care, about splitting up Sarah and Ethan because most homes couldn't take both. The thought made him sick. What about temporary custody? Jack asked. While we fight for permanent? Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. That's possible, but still complicated. We'd need to prove you're the best immediate option for the children's welfare. He pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about your relationship with them. How are they adjusting? Jack watched as Sarah carefully wiped Ethan's nose with a tissue. Sarah helps me make breakfast every morning. She likes scrambled eggs, but only if they're not too runny. Ethan, he smiled slightly. He won't go to sleep unless I read Goodnight Moon twice. The lawyer made notes. And their daily routine? I take them to the library after school. Sarah's reading's improving. The daycare near my shop watches Ethan while I work. They say he's settling in well. Jack leaned forward. Look, I know I'm not perfect, but those kids need stability. They need someone who'll put them first. Through the window, Jack saw Ethan reaching for his sister, his little face scrunched up in a yawn. Sarah scooped him up, humming softly as she rocked him. The sight made Jack's throat tight. Mr. Peterson studied him for a long moment. The path ahead will be difficult, Mr. Walker. Legal fees, court appearances, scrutiny of every aspect of your life. Are you prepared for that? Jack didn't hesitate. Whatever it takes. The lawyer began outlining the next steps, papers to file, evidence to gather, testimonies needed. But Jack's attention kept drifting to the children in the waiting room. Sarah caught his eye through the glass and gave a small wave. The thought of losing them, of them being sent to separate foster homes, made his jaw clench with determination. He'd fight with everything he had. The knock on Jack's front door came just after breakfast. Sarah was helping clear the dishes, while Ethan played with his cereal bowl, making engine noises as he pushed it across the high chair tray. Jack's heart sank when he opened the door to find 2 people standing on his porch, Miss Evans from Social Services and a police officer. The morning sun caught their badges, making them glint. Mr. Walker, Miss Evans said, her face professionally neutral. We need to discuss your current living situation with the children. Jack's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside to let them in. Sarah, seeing the visitors, quickly moved closer to Ethan, her small hand protectively touching her brother's shoulder. The officer, whose nameplate read Matthews, scanned the living room. Tools were neatly arranged on a workbench by the wall, and children's books were stacked on the coffee table. Bright crayon drawings decorated the refrigerator. "We've received some concerns," Miss Evans said, pulling out a notebook, "about your capability to provide proper care for these children." Jack crossed his arms, his tattoos visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves. "What concerns?" Officer Matthews stepped forward. "Your background, Mr. Walker. Your association with the Hells Angels raises red flags. We need to ensure the children's safety." Sarah's voice piped up from behind Jack. "He takes good care of us." Her words were fierce, despite her trembling lip. "Honey," Miss Evans said gently, "why don't you take your brother to play in the other room while we talk to Mr. Walker?" Sarah looked up at Jack, who nodded reassuringly. She lifted Ethan from his high chair and carried him to the bedroom, throwing worried glances over her shoulder. Once the children were out of earshot, Miss Evans opened her notebook. "Mr. Walker, you have no legal custody rights. You're housing these children without proper authorization." "They needed help," Jack said, his voice rough. "Their mother abandoned them in freezing weather. What was I supposed to do?" "Contact the authorities. Immediately," Officer Matthews replied. "Not take matters into your own hands. To put them in the system? Split them up?" Jack's fingers curled into fists, but he forced them to relax. "They're safe here. Fed, warm, loved." Miss Evans's expression softened slightly. "Your intentions might be good, but there are protocols." "Protocols?" Jack interrupted. "Sarah was carrying her baby brother through snow in nothing but a thin jacket. They were scared and alone. Sometimes doing what's right means breaking protocol." Officer Matthews stepped closer. "Your criminal record is in the past," Jack cut in. 10 years clean. I own my business. Pay my taxes. Ask anyone in town. I've changed." From the bedroom came the sound of Ethan's laughter, followed by Sarah's gentle shushing. The sound made Jack's chest tighten. Miss Evans made some notes. "We'll need to conduct a proper home study, interview neighbors, review your financial records." "Fine," Jack said. "Look at whatever you need. But those kids stay here." "That's not your decision to make," Officer Matthews warned. Jack drew himself up to his full height, his voice steady. "Maybe not. But I'm the one who's been getting Sarah ready for school every morning. I'm the one who rocks Ethan to sleep when he has nightmares. I'm the one they trust." "Mr. Walker," Miss Evans started. "No," Jack said firmly. "You want to investigate me? Go ahead. But I won't let you traumatize these kids by ripping them away from the only stable home they've known." The tension in the room grew thick. Officer Matthews's hand rested near his belt, while Miss Evans's pen hovered over her notebook. Through the bedroom door, they could hear Sarah softly singing to Ethan, a lullaby Jack had taught her. Jack sat heavily in his worn armchair, the phone still clutched in his hand. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window, and somewhere in the house, he could hear Sarah reading a storybook to Ethan, her voice rising and falling with each character. His conversation with Linda from the diner kept replaying in his mind. She'd called him just minutes ago, her voice urgent. "Jack, they found her. Sarah and Ethan's mother. She's alive." The words had hit him like a physical blow. Rachel Thompson had been found in a neighboring town, picked up during a drug raid. She was alive, but she was in custody. Jack rubbed his calloused hand across his face, feeling the rough scratch of his beard. The children's mother being found should have been good news. It meant they weren't orphans, that they still had family. But all he felt was a cold dread settling in his stomach. Sarah's laughter drifted down the hallway, followed by Ethan's happy gurgle. The sound made Jack's chest ache. In the weeks they'd been with him, his small house had transformed from a lonely mechanic's refuge into a real home. Crayon drawings covered his refrigerator. Stuffed animals sat in corners where motorcycle parts used to be. The smell of baby powder and children's shampoo had replaced the perpetual scent of motor oil and leather. He stood up and walked to the kitchen, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The dishes from dinner were still in the sink. Sarah had helped dry them earlier, standing on her little step stool, chattering about her day at school. Ethan's high chair still had scattered Cheerios around it, evidence of his messy eating habits. The social worker's visit this morning seemed almost prophetic now. They'd questioned his right to care for these children, and now their mother had been found. Jack knew the system. Rachel would have rights to her children, despite everything. His past as a hell's angel would work against him, while her blood connection would work in her favor. "Jack?" Sarah's small voice came from behind him. "Can you help tuck Ethan in? He likes it when you do the funny voices." He turned to find her standing in the doorway, her brother balanced on her hip. Ethan reached out his chubby arms toward Jack, making grabbing motions with his tiny hands. "Course I can, sweetheart," Jack said, his voice rougher than usual. He lifted Ethan from Sarah's arms, and the baby immediately snuggled against his chest, little fingers curling into his shirt. "You look sad," Sarah observed, her eyes wise beyond her years. "Did something bad happen?" Jack swallowed hard. "No, nothing bad. Just grown-up stuff. Let's get this little guy to bed, okay?" After tucking both children in, Jack stepped out onto his front porch. The night air was cool, and stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He needed to walk, to think, to figure out what to do next. His boots crunched on the gravel as he made his way down the street. The lights from his neighbors' windows spilled warm patches onto the sidewalk. These same neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid him now waved when they saw him walking with the kids, offered hand-me-down clothes and toys, smiled at the change they saw in the gruff mechanic. Jack's hands were shoved deep in his pockets as he walked, his mind racing. Everything was about to change. The comfortable routine they'd built, the security they'd found in each other. It was all hanging by a thread. The thought of losing Sarah and Ethan made his chest feel like it was caught in a vice. He turned back toward his house, the porch light he'd left on guiding him home. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on his shoulders with each step. The late morning sun streamed through Jack's kitchen windows as he poured milk into Ethan's sippy cup. Sarah sat at the table, her legs swinging beneath her chair as she munched on her cereal. The quiet routine of their breakfast was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Jack's shoulders tensed. He knew that firm, official knock all too well. Setting down the milk carton, he walked to the front door, his heavy boots echoing against the wooden floor. Through the window, he could see two women in business, attire standing on his porch, their expressions serious. "Mr. Walker?" the taller woman asked as he opened the door. "I'm Ms. Thompson from Child Protective Services, and this is my colleague, Ms. Rivera. We need to speak with you about Sarah and Ethan." Jack's throat tightened, but he nodded and stepped aside to let them in. Sarah had stopped eating, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth as she watched the social workers enter. Ethan, oblivious to the tension, babbled happily in his high chair. "Perhaps we could speak privately," Ms. Thompson suggested, glancing at the children. "Sarah, honey," Jack said, his voice gentle. "Could you take Ethan to play in the living room for a bit?" Sarah's eyes darted between Jack and the social workers, but she nodded. She carefully lifted Ethan from his high chair and carried him to the other room, throwing worried glances over her shoulder. Once the children were out of earshot, Ms. Thompson cleared her throat. "Mr. Walker, we've located the children's mother, Rachel Thompson. She's currently in police custody in Millbrook County." Jack gripped the back of a kitchen chair, his knuckles turning white. He'd known this day might come. But that didn't make it any easier. "She's facing drug charges," Ms. Rivera added, her voice softer than her colleagues. "But once she's released, she'll have the right to petition for custody of her children." "Those kids have been through enough," Jack growled, keeping his voice low so Sarah wouldn't hear. "You can't just—" "Mr. Walker," Ms. Thompson interrupted, "we understand you've developed an attachment to Sarah and Ethan, but the fact remains that you have no legal right to custody. Your history with the Hells Angels, your previous—" "That was years ago," Jack cut in, his jaw clenched. "I've changed. These kids need stability. They need—" A small noise from the doorway made them all turn. Sarah stood there, clutching Ethan tightly, her face pale. "They found Mommy?" she whispered. The social workers exchanged glances as Jack crossed the room to kneel in front of Sarah. "Yeah, sweetheart, they did," he said softly. Sarah's lower lip trembled. "But she left us. She left us in the cold." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Jack. "Please don't let them take us." Jack pulled both children into his arms, feeling Ethan's tiny hands pat his beard, while Sarah buried her face in his shoulder. He looked up at the social workers, who watched the scene with a mix of sympathy and professional detachment. "I promise you," he said to Sarah, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm going to do everything I can to keep us together. Everything." Ms. Thompson cleared her throat. "Mr. Walker, we should discuss the next steps." But Jack barely heard her. He was focused on the trembling little girl in his arms and the baby who had somehow become his whole world. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but as he held them close, he made a silent vow to fight with everything he had to keep his newfound family together. The courthouse loomed before Jack like a fortress of stone and judgment. His work boots felt out of place on the polished marble floor as he made his way to courtroom C. Linda, the diner waitress, had helped him pick out his only suit, a plain black number that felt like a costume on his broad frame. Sarah and Ethan sat with their social worker on the opposite side of the courtroom. Sarah wore the blue dress Jack had bought her last week, her hair neatly braided by Linda. Ethan dozed in the social worker's arms, unaware of the gravity of the moment. When Sarah caught Jack's eye, she gave him a small wave, which he returned with a tight smile. Their mother, Rachel Thompson, sat with her attorney. She looked better than Jack remembered, cleaned up, sober, wearing borrowed business attire that didn't quite fit. Her hands fidgeted in her lap as she stared straight ahead. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Margaret Wilson presiding." Judge Wilson, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, studied the papers before her with sharp eyes. The air in the courtroom felt thick with tension as she began to speak. "This court has reviewed all relevant documentation regarding the custody of Sarah and Ethan Thompson," she stated. "We have considered the mother's recent completion of rehabilitation programs, her steady employment at the halfway house, and her commitment to maintaining sobriety." Jack's attorney squeezed his arm, reassuringly, but Jack barely felt it. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, who looked so small in the large wooden chair. "While we acknowledge Mr. Walker's admirable care of the children during this difficult time," the judge continued, "the court must consider the fundamental right of a parent to raise their children, provided they are fit to do so." Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek. Jack's hands clenched into fists under the table. "The documentation shows that Ms. Thompson has made significant progress in addressing her substance abuse issues. She has maintained sobriety for 6 months, secured employment, and demonstrated a genuine desire to rebuild her life and care for her children." The judge paused, looking directly at Jack. "Mr. Walker, your intervention likely saved these children from serious harm, and this court commends your actions. However, without any legal or biological connection to the children, and given your own complicated history, This court cannot supersede the rights of their rehabilitated mother. Sarah began to cry silently, her small shoulders shaking. Jack fought the urge to cross the room and comfort her. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that custody of Sarah and Ethan Thompson be returned to their mother, Rachel Thompson, with mandatory supervision from Child Protective Services for a period of 1 year. The words hit Jack like physical blows. Rachel covered her mouth, crying quietly, but Jack couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or guilt. The transition will begin immediately, Judge Wilson continued. Mr. Walker will have no contact with the children unless explicitly authorized by Ms. Thompson and Child Protective Services. The social worker stood, lifting Ethan. Sarah resisted at first when they came to collect her, her eyes locked on Jack's. Court is adjourned, Judge Wilson announced, her gavel falling with a final, devastating crack. Jack remained seated, unable to move as he watched the social workers lead Sarah and Ethan away. Sarah looked back one last time, her face streaked with tears, before disappearing through the heavy wooden doors. Slowly, like a man much older than his years, Jack pushed himself to his feet. He walked out of the courtroom, each step feeling heavier than the last, leaving behind the family he'd grown to love, but had no right to keep. The fluorescent lights of the social services office buzzed overhead as Jack sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his large frame making it creak. Across the desk, Ms. Evans shuffled through a stack of papers, her expression sympathetic but firm. Mr. Walker, I understand your attachment to Sarah and Ethan, but the system has very specific requirements, she explained, adjusting her glasses. Single men with your background rarely qualify for temporary custody. Jack leaned forward, his voice rough with emotion. Those kids know me. They trust me. Doesn't that count for something? Of course it does, Ms. Evans said softly. But we have protocols to follow. The foster family they're with now has years of experience and proper certification. Jack's mind wandered to the sterile foster home he'd visited yesterday. The house was clean and well-maintained, the foster parents kind enough. But it wasn't home. Sarah had barely looked at him during the supervised visit, holding Ethan close as she stared out the window. What do I need to do? Jack asked, his fingers drumming against his knee. Take classes? Get certified? Whatever it is, I'll do it. Ms. Evans pulled out a thick packet of forms. You'd need character references, proof of stable income, a home study, background checks. She paused, glancing at his tattooed arms. And you'd need to explain your past association with the hellsangels. Jack's jaw tightened. That was years ago. I've changed. The committee will need more than your word on that, she replied gently. They'll want to see evidence of your rehabilitation, your integration into the community. Jack stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. The weight of his past felt heavier than ever, but he refused to let it stop him. He thought of Sarah's smile when he'd read her bedtime stories, of Ethan's tiny hands reaching for him in the morning. Then I'll get you evidence, he said firmly. Leaving the office, Jack drove straight to Linda's diner. The lunch rush was just ending, and Linda was wiping down tables when he walked in. She took one look at his face and gestured to an empty booth. They're not making it easy, are they? She asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Jack shook his head. They want references, proof that I'm not the man I used to be. He looked up at Linda, his eyes filled with determination. I need your help. Linda reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You've got it. Everyone in this diner has seen how you are with those kids. We all watched you change, Jack. Would you write a letter? He asked. Tell them what you've seen? Of course I will, Linda said without hesitation. And I bet Pastor Mike would too. He's seen you fixing up the church's old van for free. Jack nodded slowly, hope beginning to build. The hardware store owner, Tom, he's known me for years, watched me build my business from nothing. And don't forget Mrs. Rodriguez, Linda added. She still talks about how you helped her after her husband passed, refusing to take payment for fixing her car. Jack pulled out a notebook and began writing names. People he'd helped over the years, neighbors who'd seen him working honest days, community members who knew him as more than just his past. I'll need all of them, he said, his pen moving quickly across the paper. The system wants proof? I'll show them who I am now. Linda smiled, already reaching for her phone. Let me start making some calls. We'll show them that you're exactly what those children need. The foster home sat on a quiet, suburban street, its neat garden and white picket fence a stark contrast to Jack's modest house. He parked his truck, the engine's rumble fading into silence. His heart felt heavy as he walked up the concrete path, each step bringing him closer to the hardest part of his week, visiting Sarah and Ethan. Mrs. Peterson, the foster mother, opened the door before he could knock. She was a plump woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair. They've been waiting for you, Mr. Walker, she said softly. Sarah's barely spoken all morning. Jack nodded, following her into the living room. The space was pristine, filled with educational toys and children's books, everything a proper foster home should have. But it felt sterile, lacking the warmth of the messy, lived-in comfort of his own house. Sarah sat on the couch, Ethan secure in her arms as always. When she saw Jack, her eyes lit up, but she didn't move. Jack recognized that look. She was trying to be brave, to not show how much she missed him. Hey, kiddo, he said, keeping his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. He sat down beside them, and Ethan immediately reached for his beard, a familiar gesture that made Jack's throat tighten. When can we come home? Sarah whispered, her small fingers clutching Ethan's blanket. Mrs. Peterson is nice, but... She trailed off, biting her lip. Jack gently took Ethan, cradling him while reaching out to touch Sarah's shoulder. I'm working on it, sweetheart. I've got people helping me. Linda from the diner, you remember? Her, and lots of others too. Ethan babbled happily in Jack's arms, pulling at his jacket with tiny fists. The baby had grown in the short time they'd been apart, and it hurt to think of the moments he was missing. But what if it takes too long? Sarah's voice trembled. What if they make us go somewhere else? Jack shifted closer, wrapping his free arm around her shoulders. She immediately leaned into him, her small body shaking with suppressed sobs. Listen to me, Sarah. I'm not giving up. Not ever. I promise you that. Pinky promise? She held up her little finger, just like she used to do at his house when he promised to check for monsters under her bed. Pinky promise. Jack linked his large finger with her tiny one, careful to be gentle. I've got meetings with important people, and I'm doing everything they ask. It might take some time, but I'm not stopping until you're both home. Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic. Mr. Walker, visiting hours are almost over. Sarah's grip on his jacket tightened. No, please, just a little longer. I have to go, kiddo, Jack said, his heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. But I'll be back on Thursday, just like always. Sarah wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his shirt. Ethan, sensing the tension, began to whimper. Jack held them both close, memorizing the feeling of their warmth, their trust in him. I don't want you to go, Sarah whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. I know, sweetheart. I know. Jack's voice was rough with emotion. He carefully disentangled himself, passing Ethan back to Sarah. The baby's face scrunched up, ready to cry. Sarah stood holding her brother, tears streaming down her face now. "Promise you'll come back." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Jack said, forcing a smile. "Remember what I told you? You're stuck with me now." Linda wiped down the counter of her diner for the 100th time, though it was already spotless. Her mind wasn't on the work. It was on the blank paper in front of her. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the empty tables. "Dear Judge Morrison," she read what she'd written so far, then shook her head. Setting down her cloth, she pulled up a stool and started again. "Your Honor, I've worked at Joe's Diner for 15 years. I've seen all kinds of people come through those doors, but I've never seen anyone change like Jack Walker has since Sarah and Ethan came into his life." Her pen moved faster now, the words flowing easier. She described that first snowy night when Jack brought the children in, how gentle he was despite his intimidating appearance. She wrote about the following weeks, how he'd come in every morning to get breakfast for Sarah, always making sure to get extra fruit because growing kids need their vitamins. The man who used to sit alone in the corner, barely speaking to anyone, now reads storybooks to Ethan while Sarah does. Her homework at the counter, Linda wrote. He learned to braid Sarah's hair by watching YouTube videos. I saw him practicing on a mop after hours when he thought no one was looking. Across town, others were writing too. Mr. Chen from the grocery store described how Jack now bought fresh vegetables instead of just frozen dinners, asking for cooking advice to make healthy meals for the children. Mrs. Thompson from the library wrote about how Jack got his first library card so he could check out picture books for Ethan. Even Tom, the gruff auto parts supplier who'd known Jack for years, sat at his desk after hours, penning his thoughts. I've known Walker since his darker days, he wrote. Used to worry when I saw him coming. Now, he's got pictures of those kids in his wallet, talks about their future like it's the most important thing in the world, because to him, it is. Back at the diner, Linda dabbed at her eyes with a napkin as she finished her letter. These children need more than just a roof over their heads, she concluded. They need someone who loves them completely, who would move heaven and earth to keep them safe. They need Jack. The next morning, Jack's lawyer, David Martinez, arrived at his office to find a stack of envelopes on his desk. As he read through them, his expression softened. There were dozens of letters, from shopkeepers, teachers, neighbors, even the local police chief who'd once been wary of Jack's presence in town. Each letter told a story of transformation, of a man who'd gone from being a shadow in the community to someone who helped elderly Mrs. Wilson carry her groceries because Sarah said we should always help people. Of someone who volunteered to fix the church's heating system when he heard kids were cold during Sunday school. Of a father who'd found his way back to love through two children who needed him as much as he needed them. When Jack arrived at the law office that afternoon, David handed him the stack of letters. Read these, he said simply. Jack's hands trembled as he read letter after letter. His vision blurred at Linda's description of him practicing hair braiding. He had to stop several times, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from people he'd barely spoken to before Sarah and Ethan came into his life. They see it, David said quietly. They all see what those kids mean to you. And now the judge will see it too. Jack carefully gathered the letters, holding them like they were precious treasure. For the first time since the children had been taken, he felt something stir in his chest, a small, fragile spark of hope. The courthouse stood tall and imposing in the morning light. Inside courtroom B, Judge Morrison adjusted her reading glasses as she carefully reviewed the stack of letters before her. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes moved methodically across each page. Jack sat rigid in his chair beside David Martinez, his lawyer. His usually intimidating frame seemed smaller somehow, hunched with worry. He'd traded his typical leather jacket for a clean, button-down shirt that felt too tight around his neck. His hands, rough from years of mechanical work, were clasped tightly in his lap. The courtroom was quiet, except for the soft shuffling of papers. Linda sat in the back row, along with several other townspeople who'd written letters. Even Tom from the auto parts store had closed his shop to be there, his worn baseball cap clutched in his hands. "Your Honor," David began, rising from his seat. "The evidence before you shows more than just letters of support. It shows a community that has witnessed an extraordinary transformation." His voice was steady and clear in the hushed courtroom. "Mr. Walker has not only provided a safe home for these children, but has become an active, contributing member of this community because of them." Judge Morrison looked up from the letters, her eyes settling on Jack. "Mr. Walker, your past concerns me," she said frankly. "Your association with the Hells Angels, your previous brushes with the law." Jack's shoulders tensed, but he met her gaze directly. David continued, "Your Honor, my client's past is exactly why these letters are so significant. They document real change, witnessed by dozens of community members over several months." The judge picked up one letter specifically, Linda's, and adjusted her glasses again. "I'm particularly interested in the daily observations from Ms. Parker at the diner. She's documented quite a transformation." Jack remembered all those mornings at the diner, teaching Sarah to read the menu, helping Ethan with his first solid foods. His throat felt tight. "Furthermore," David added, "we have reports from Sarah and Ethan's teachers noting marked improvement in their attendance and performance during their time with Mr. Walker. Sarah's anxiety levels have decreased significantly, according to the school counselor." Judge Morrison set down the papers and folded her hands. "Mr. Walker, stand please." Jack rose slowly, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The judge studied him for a long moment. "What I see before me is compelling evidence of rehabilitation through responsibility," she began. "These letters paint a picture of a man who has found purpose in caring for two children who desperately need stability." She paused, looking down at her notes. "However, given your history, I cannot ignore the need for careful oversight." Jack held his breath. Linda leaned forward in her seat. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I am granting you temporary custody of Sarah and Ethan, under strict supervision." She held up her hand as a murmur went through the courtroom. "You will submit to regular visits from social services. The children will continue their counseling sessions. And you, Mr. Walker, will attend parenting classes and regular check-ins with family services." Relief flooded through Jack's body, making his knees weak. He gripped the table for support. "Do you understand these conditions, Mr. Walker?" "Yes, Your Honor," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. "I understand completely." "Very well." Judge Morrison made a final note in her papers. "We'll review this arrangement in 6 months. Court is adjourned." The bang of the gavel seemed to echo in Jack's ears as he slowly sank back into his chair. David patted his shoulder, grinning, but Jack barely noticed. The weight of responsibility settled over him, not as a burden, but as a precious gift he never thought he'd receive. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jack's driveway as his old pickup truck rumbled to a stop. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment, looking at Sarah and Ethan in the rearview mirror. Sarah caught his eye and gave him a small, tired smile. "We're home," Jack said softly, his voice rough with emotion. The word home felt different now. His modest house, with its weathered siding and creaky porch steps, had transformed from a lonely refuge into something more. The familiar sight of his motorcycle parts scattered around the garage, and the tools hanging on the wall seemed to welcome them back. Sarah helped Ethan out of his car seat, while Jack grabbed their bags from the trunk. The little boy had grown so much in the past months. He was walking now, though still unsteady on his feet. Sarah held his hand as they made their way up the path. "Careful there, buddy," Jack called as Ethan wobbled on the steps. The toddler giggled, gripping the railing with his free hand. Inside, the house felt warmer somehow. Linda had been by earlier to help clean up and stock the fridge, her way of celebrating the court's decision. A colorful welcome home banner hung across the living room, and there were fresh flowers on the coffee table. "Look, Sarah," Jack said, pointing to the wall near the kitchen. "I hung up your drawings while you were gone." The refrigerator artwork had migrated to proper frames, creating a gallery of crayon masterpieces that told the story of their time together. Sarah's eyes lit up as she spotted her favorite, a picture of the three of them standing in front of what was supposed to be their house, though it looked more like a castle with its towering spires and rainbow-colored walls. "You kept them all," she whispered. "Course I did," Jack replied, setting down their bags. "Every single one." Ethan toddled over to his favorite spot on the floor, where his toys were waiting. Jack had spent hours baby-proofing the house, making sure everything dangerous was well out of reach. The sight of building blocks and stuffed animals scattered across his once sparse living room made his heart swell. "Are you hungry?" Jack asked, heading to the kitchen. Linda left us some of her famous lasagna. "Yes," Sarah exclaimed, following him. She knew exactly where the plates were kept now, and she helped set the table while Jack warmed up the food. Though a familiar routine felt right, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. They gathered around the small kitchen table, the fireplace crackling nearby. Jack had started keeping it lit in the evenings. Something about the warmth seemed to make the house feel more like a home. Ethan sat in his high chair, messily attacking his small portion of lasagna, while Sarah told Jack about the books she'd read at the foster home. "But I like your stories better," she said between bites. "You do all the funny voices?" Jack chuckled, reaching over to wipe some sauce from Ethan's chin. The toddler grabbed his finger, refusing to let go, and they all laughed at his determination. The sound of their laughter filled the kitchen, mixing with the pop and crackle of the fire. Jack watched as Sarah helped Ethan with his sippy cup, her natural care for her brother unchanged by their time apart. The warm light from the fireplace danced across their faces, and Jack felt a completeness he'd never known before. As they sat there eating and laughing together, Jack realized that his house had finally become what he'd always wanted but never thought he'd have: a real home, filled with love and the sound of children's laughter. The morning air felt crisp, but not bitter, as Jack walked down the sidewalk, holding Ethan's hand, while Sarah skipped ahead of them. The last patches of snow were melting away, creating little rivulets that trickled down the street gutters. Spring was finally pushing through the long winter, bringing with it a sense of renewal that matched Jack's own transformation. "Look, Daddy!" Sarah called out, pointing to a robin hopping along the grass near the park entrance. The word "daddy" still caught him off guard sometimes, filling his chest with a warmth he couldn't quite describe. It had started naturally, without prompting, and now it felt as right as anything had ever felt in his life. Ethan wobbled beside him, his little legs working hard to keep up. "One up?" he demanded, raising his arms. Jack scooped him up and settled him on his shoulders, earning a delighted squeal from the toddler, who immediately grabbed onto his beard for balance. "Easy there, buddy," Jack chuckled, reaching up to loosen the tiny fingers tangled in his facial hair. "That's attached, you know." The park was quiet this morning, with just a few other families scattered around the playground. Sarah made a beeline for the swings, her favorite spot. Jack followed behind, Ethan still perched on his shoulders, making motorcycle noises that made the little boy giggle uncontrollably. "Can you push me?" Sarah asked, already settling into the swing. Jack lifted Ethan down and set him in the baby swing next to Sarah's. "Both of you at once," he said, positioning himself between the swings. Ready? Ready! Sarah exclaimed, while Ethan just kicked his feet in anticipation. Jack began pushing them both, alternating between the swings with a practiced rhythm he'd developed over their time together. Sarah pumped her legs, getting higher and higher, while Ethan contentedly swayed back and forth, occasionally reaching out to touch Jack's hand as he passed. The sound of their laughter carried across the park, mixing with the chirping of spring birds and the rustle of new leaves in the breeze. Jack watched as Sarah's hair caught the sunlight, streaming behind her like a banner as she swung forward. Ethan's face was pure joy, his little hands gripping the swing's chains as he moved through the air. These moments, Jack realized, were what he'd been missing all those years alone in his workshop, surrounded by cold metal and the ghosts of his past. The warmth of the morning sun seemed to reach deep into his bones, melting away the last bits of winter's chill and the old hurts he'd carried for so long. Sarah jumped off her swing at its apex, landing with the confidence of childhood. "Watch me on the monkey bars," she called out, running toward the climbing structure. Jack moved to stand behind Ethan's swing, letting it slow naturally as the toddler began squirming to get down. Once free, Ethan toddled after his sister, determined to keep up despite his wobbly legs. Standing there, watching his children play in the morning sun, Jack felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. Sarah was helping Ethan climb the small steps to the slide, holding his hand and encouraging him with the patience of a loving big sister. The sight of them together, happy and secure, made Jack's heart feel full to bursting. This was his family now. Not by blood, but by something deeper. By choice, by love, by the simple truth that they belonged together. The man he used to be, the lonely wolf who kept the world at bay, seemed like a distant memory now. In his place stood a father, watching his children play in the spring sunshine, his heart more complete than he ever thought possible. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful